changing the situation. This is a passage that is very familiar to just about everybody. We've all heard of most of us have heard the contest of Mount Carmel, so much so that as a minister, I always figured that I would never really deal with this because so much has been written and spoken about this passage that there's hardly, it's nothing in the Bible is cliche, but there's certain things you feel like there's so many great things that have been done with it. You really don't want to mess with it. Just leave it alone. Let somebody listen to a recording. Unfortunately, God doesn't let me pick my own messages and send me out this way. So what we have here, just by way of remembrance, is the end of a 3-year drought. The king of Ahab, the king of the northern tribe, the northern kingdom of Israel, had married a woman by the name of Jezebel, who was a Sidonian, a Canaanite woman who worshipped a god of Canaan known as Baal. Now, Baal is a generic term that's actually used in a lot of different cultures for a lot of different gods. This specific Baal was the storm god and the fertility god. And because this marriage was political, Ahab thought, well, we'll blend the cultures, and began to worship Baal himself. Built temples in the capital city of Israel, which was Samaria. Not the Samaria that the Samaritans are from, that comes later, but the capital city of Israel they had established as Samaria. Builds altars to Baal, builds places of worship, builds temples there, and begins to do so himself. And we find in the 17th chapter where Elijah pops up seemingly out of nowhere, and he doesn't give him a very long sermon. He doesn't say a whole lot to him. He just says, it's not going to rain until I say it's going to rain, and walks off. And subsequent to that, there was a 3.5-year drought. No water, no rain. Elijah was provided for, but the kingdom of Israel, the northern tribes, were under a great strain because where there's no rain, there's no crops. Where there's no crops, the animals don't have anything to eat. So much so that in the 18th chapter, and some of what we skipped over, you find that the king Ahab had to search the land and try to find some place for his cattle and for his animals to eat so that way they didn't die. And in that first verse, we see that God has given Elijah instruction to go and present yourself to Ahab. Up to this point, he had been hiding, and present yourself to him, and then we're going to send the rain and bring it into this drought. Elijah does so, and he tells Ahab to get the nation of Israel together, ostensibly because I've got something that I want to talk to them about, or I want to deal with them on. And he gets the entire nation of Israel together and asks them a very simple question. Who is God? Is Baal this storm god that hasn't brought you any rain for the last 3 years? Is he God, or is the Lord God of Israel God? And it says that they answered him not a word. This wasn't a complicated question in my mind, looking at this. It shouldn't have been that hard for them to answer, especially when you take in mind these were God's people in God's land. They weren't in some foreign land where during captivity, which comes later. These were the people of God in the land of God, and could not, like I said, it's no deep question. This isn't metaphysics. This isn't nuclear. This isn't calculus, or this isn't deep stuff. This is just who is God, and God's people didn't know what to answer. And so, because they didn't know what to answer, it required a demonstration for God to clarify this. But the first question to my mind is, how in the world do God's people not know who God is? How do you not how is it not easy to declare as God's people, the people who were delivered from Egypt, the people who had been given the promised land, how do you not know who God is? And to find the answer to that, you actually have to go back about 80 years to the first king of Israel, whose name was Jeroboam. And this, after the nation split to the northern and southern kingdoms, Jeroboam was appointed king of the northern, by God, was appointed king of the northern tribes. And in Jeroboam's mind, he was concerned that people would go back to Jerusalem because Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom. He had a concern that if these people go to Jerusalem to worship, which is where the temple was, if they go to Jerusalem to worship, that they're going to abandon me and they're going to rejoin with the south. And so what he did was that he decided and took it upon himself to try to make worship a little bit more convenient for people. And he established 2 cities, one in Bethel, one in Dan, in order for them to be able to go and worship and not have to make the trek to Jerusalem. And he made 2 graven images and put one in each side and said that these are the gods that have delivered you out of Egypt. I want you to understand that that's a problem. Not only does it defy a commandment because we're not supposed to make a graven image of God, and my own reasoning for that is because God is bigger than any image we could come up with. It's almost an insult to him to sit and, as soon as you come up with something, you have defined and constrained God to whatever that concept is. And for God, it's an insult. He's so big that we don't even have a word in our vocabulary to actually describe him, which is why he simplified matters for us and just said, well, call me I am. That's it, because whatever name you come up with, I'm bigger than that. So the graven image thing was a big issue with God, because you're not going to insult me by confining me to some specific image. I'm bigger than that. But it was a change and a distortion from the original manner that God